Hey, what's up, my friends? Step outside for a little chat. Got my cup of coffee, got my vape pen, and it's like 5 minutes of relaxation, if I can afford that. I'm gonna make a video about being a dad, because I really haven't made one. You know, in 3,000 something videos, I've never made a video really about being a parent. And I think there's a reason for that. There's a few reasons. One, my private life is my private life. And number two, people who have kids get it and understand. But number three, there are a lot of deadbeat parents out there. And talking about children brings up a lot of issues with some folks. I want to start off by saying that I was just sitting contemplating deadbeat dads, and I was going to use the term that I understand, or rather, I don't know what the word I really thought of was, but I was trying to decide, okay, if a man impregnates a woman, the woman decides to keep the child, the couple breaks up, don't want anything to do with each other, neither one of them are ready to be parents, or maybe the father's not ready, and he decides he's just going to live his life and ignore being a dad. And, what to think about that. One line of thinking is, hey, if you got someone pregnant, you should deal with it and raise the kid. Another line of thinking says, hey, men are promiscuous, men want to wander around, that nature, tells us that the men tend to want to, I guess, explore, sow their oats or whatnot. But that's not an excuse at all if you've made the decision with well-intentioned and knowledge that you may get someone pregnant, and then you decide to abandon being a father. It's a really complicated thing, and it's really destructive in our society. I'm not saying that a gay couple or a straight couple has any real huge impact on the child. I'm not talking about a male and female. I'm talking about having two parents, because raising children is one of the most complicated things, the most difficult job I've ever had. And sometimes when somebody says, hey, what do you do? My first thought is I'm a stay-at-home dad, first and foremost. I have various sources of income and my businesses that I've had over the years, but my main job has been being dad. And it's one that doesn't pay very well. It's one that costs a lot of money and a lot of patience and a lot of time. And I have 3 children. One is 21, and the other 2 are 3 and 6. And they all live with us right now. So it's a complete variety of, age groups, obviously. But my youngest are 3 years apart, just like my brother and I were. And my brother and I were hellions. I mean, we were fighting constantly. And a parent makes a decision. Do I have another child for my child to be entertained, or, have a brother or sister to grow up with? Or do I raise a single child in a world where I can actually give them the things that they want and need? That's really a personal choice. All these things are personal choices. How many kids you have, how you decide to raise them. But when it comes to being a parent, I think one of the worst things that dads do is when they decide that they don't want to be a dad, and then 10 years later they think, oh, I want to be a dad now all of a sudden. And they go back and they revisit their children, and they try to demand either custody or demand rights to see their children, and it confuses the hell out of the kids. I haven't seen my dad in years. My mom had to make up some story about where he went or whatnot, or whether it was the truth or not. And along comes dad deciding he wants to be a parent. This is something that I believe personally, or I feel strongly about. If you weren't there to raise your child during the critical years, then you're not a parent. You're just a sperm donor, okay? And this goes the same for women. If a woman gives up her child, when they're born, and she decides she wants to be a mother down the line, that's fine if you want to visit your child, but don't expect to have that bond, because the bond between child and their parent, sure, it's genetic in a way, but it's mostly the oxytocin that forms between the two. It's a complicated chemistry that, oxytocin is released in the bloodstream. It makes you very bonded to that person. And the most difficult years are the first 4 or 5 years. The kid, you have to go through the whole diaper phase, and as soon as that's done, you got to make sure that they're wiping right, and all these little things people don't think about until you're a parent. getting them dressed in the morning, getting them ready for school, listening to them fight and argue. And then that doesn't even include the aspect of the parent who said, well, when I have kids, I'm going to be this way about it. I'm going to raise my kids the right way. I'm going to homeschool my kids. And then school age comes and you realize, well, if I homeschool my kids, then it's a lot of work on my part. And then I have to give up on working so I can teach my kids and be home with them. And it's something I mentioned because it's something I considered in the past, that, hey, I'd like to homeschool my kids because I don't want them going into public school. The reason I'm mentioning all this is because there are a lot of people who point fingers at how others raise kids, how they should or shouldn't be. A lot of people are really dislike the school system, which I totally understand. Public school has all kinds of issues. But you got to remember that the school isn't there to teach your kid how to be a child. And he's sure as hell not there to teach your kid how to be a man or a woman, okay? School is there to teach your kid academics. And just because they come home from school, it doesn't mean that you can't continue teaching them. You have to supplement what they learn at school with the value-based system that you want to implement or at least teach them. And it's hard because you don't want to tell your kid what to believe. I don't want to tell my kid that God does or doesn't exist. I don't want to tell my kid that he should or shouldn't work towards having money. If he grows up and he decides he wants to be a millionaire, then that's his choice. But if I hold him back by telling him that money is worthless and he doesn't need to work towards that, they may resent you for not telling them, hey, it's a dog-eat-dog world. No matter what people may think and how much you may love one another, people have to make their own, and they have to make their own way, and they got to be tough to do that. So you present tough love to your children as much as you can. But at the same time, you want to hug and kiss and love them and tell them how much and how important they are, and you don't want them to be sensitive, but you don't want them to be overly harsh or critical. And those early years, those formative years, are the ones that really set a kid into who he is. And it's very, very difficult for a parent. There are no quick answers. There's no book on how to be a parent, although there are several books written that attempt to tackle the subject of being a parent. And I've read several different literature pieces and books. One I was reading called Sibling Rivalry, and it was somebody who held a class for parents who had kids who were constantly fighting. And when you compare it, to my kids who may be screaming at each other for a little while each day, some of these kids stab each other with pencils, punch each other, push their brothers and sisters downstairs, scratching babies. I mean, kids do some harsh things. And it really makes you wonder, what really is human nature? How much are we really teaching our kids, and how much is just, inherent within them genetically? People are competitive by nature. People become jealous, of their siblings. And I'll be damned if there's any job I've ever done that's more difficult than being a parent. There's only one job, in my opinion, or one obligation that's more difficult than being a parent, and that is parenting yourself. That is growth. And something I should add is, I've heard Manly Hall speak in many lectures on this subject, and one of them in particular, he spoke about how many parents become attached to their children because they don't have a life of their own or don't want to develop, something for themselves. So when their children are gone, they don't know what to do anymore. And they live vicariously through their kids. And many grandparents, I guess, do this too. They love the children so much they'll give them anything that they want, and they coddle them, and the grandparents always give the kids candy, you know how it goes, and always go against the parents' rules because it's a little bit of maybe guilt, or maybe because maybe they couldn't do that for their own children, because you can't just give your children everything they want or they'll step on you. So it makes it really hard when grandma, let's say, or grandpa gives the kids a bunch of candy or toys, but you have to understand that they're doing their best for whatever reason they're doing it. It's not always to make up for something they didn't do. Sometimes they just want to spoil the kid. But remember that sometimes grandparents also live vicariously through the grandchildren and through their children. So my point here is the most important thing is to realize that while you're a parent, being a parent is the most important job you have. As your kids get older, you are going to have to step back into your own growth pattern and figure out what you want, which is the most difficult job, which is personal growth. If you choose to obtain that type of lifestyle, if you choose to grow, if you choose to improve yourself. When you're trying to improve yourself in your life and you have children, they're constantly holding you at a certain level. I've spoken with people that just decide they're going to up and leave and go travel around the world and maybe go visit monks or meditate or go stay in some particular place or build a cabin in the woods. Folks forget that people who have kids don't have this option, because we're bringing up the next generation of children and we're doing our best to instill values so when they raise their children have good values, and doing the best to assume that our values are correct or valid. And I think that teaching our children to just be good people and to find happiness through action and service and not through means or materials, that's the best we can do, and just hope that they obtain something from that. But after that, you're back to growth. When my kids are grown up, there will be a time where I will be stuck looking at myself again, even though I'm trying to do that while I'm raising kids. It's very hard, and so if you're a person who's trying to grow and you're trying to obtain some sort of understanding of self, and you're taking journeys in your mind and you're experiencing life, just remember that it's okay if you can't obtain what you want to do or where you want to be at this very moment, because down the line you'll have your chance. And that's what I tell myself, But what I've realized mostly is that there's nowhere I want to go. There's nowhere I can pick up and leave to that would make me satisfied, because, and this is something that I'm fortunate to have had kids, because it taught me that there is nowhere to go. Because if you're trying to escape, you're trying to escape yourself. You're trying to escape your own reality. You're trying to escape something about who you are. Very seldom are people trying to actually escape society or escape the things around them. It's usually themselves. When I was 21, I went with a friend of mine to Montana. And we were on a kind of a vacation type trip, me and him, but at the same time we were there to scout for land, to see how much land would cost, to see if we could get up there and get out of the city, to get away. Years later, after I did, I was fortunate to not move there. Montana's been, most of the good farmland has been scraped of nutrients from the Missoula floods. There's not a lot of places to grow. There's a lot of cattle out there, but it gets cold, and there's not a whole lot of, there's not a lot to do. It's a great place to escape. The economy sucked, at least at that time. I don't know how it is now. And I realized, what is in Montana that's not here in the Pacific Northwest, in Oregon? I have mountains, I have ocean, everything I want next to me. Why would I want to move away? And so anyway, kind of getting off track, but it was an important thing to remember for me, or to discover, because I realized not only do I not want to move, I don't really know why I would want to move. I don't have any reason to leave. Everything is here within the mind, and so now having kids, I could pick up and move, but we're kind of trapped here with my wife. My wife works here, and we've always lived here. All our family's here, and that's okay. There's nowhere to run away to, and I don't want to. And I'm very grateful to have children. I'm very grateful to have a loving family, and I know I never take it for granted, because I know a lot of people out there are hurting and really want somebody that they can love, and that's got to be a painful thing. Yeah. Some people are missing the love so much that they overly attach to their children or to other people, and for me, it's always been finding that balance between my attachment and my codependence on others and my level of independence for myself. I want to be an independent thinker, but I know I'm not an independent. My emotional state is very dependent on having people around to share experiences with. And having children and paying that price to grow, to raise them, teaches you a lot, but it also gives you a lifelong relationship, so long as you do it right. I didn't mean to insult the deadbeat dads of the world, because I know that the dads out there who have abandoned their children, it probably hurts. It's gotta hurt. And this is why a lot of people try to reclaim that by coming back into their lives later when they feel more responsible. My advice would be, don't bother. And I know that sounds harsh, but being a sperm donor and being a father are completely different things. It's kind of like if somebody jumped into the position of CEO after they'd never worked their way up, and everybody in the workplace was like, what the hell? The person has no experience. The person doesn't know what they're doing. And so the dad comes into the kid's life, but it doesn't help the kid usually. It usually helps the father. And if the kid chooses to seek out the father when they're older, that's a different story. Or if they're asking about them. But it's complicated. I have my stepson is 21 now, and he was 3 when I met my wife, and his father was a deadbeat, and he would come around now and again. I remember one time he came to pick up the kid. He only came every, maybe once or twice a year, but he did it almost like as an obligation, and he was hateful, he was angry, he'd wake up with, he had all kinds of mental issues, and he'd wake up screaming and stuff like that, freak the kid out. My son would come home crying, and it'd just piss me off. Because here I am trying to raise my stepson, he's, trying to raise him to be a happy citizen, and he comes home from his dad and is miserable and upset every time. And I remember one time the guy came, and I went out to meet him, and I introduced myself, and I said, hey, I'm Josh. And he looked at me, or he looked right past me, didn't even offer a handshake, and he said, hey, are you ready to go? To the kid, and I left, and that was it. I realized he's a dirtbag. He can't look me in the eye, he can't shake my hand, because he knows he's a dirtbag. And not just because he left, he was really a dirtbag, just a slime ball. But I did my best to raise that kid, and he turned out to be a phenomenal man. He's a wonderful man now, and I just hope that I can do the same thing with my other kids. At least be able to raise them to understand what it means to be a human as best I can. Because I'll be damned if I know what it means to be a human. I don't pretend to know. I think it's a phenomenal thing. My deepest explorations into the psyche, especially with psychedelics, have shown me that we're all connected, that we're all one. And it's not even up for debate anymore. Everything is intertwined. The sixth sense, if you will, or seventh sense, the experience of just knowing, being aware of things. And with that awareness, it helps you to share and be kinder to others and be fair and want to help other people for the right reasons.